I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. I want to start off the show by telling you guys thanks a lot for checking out Mail Call Mondays and for watching our other videos. In the last couple of weeks, our views have been going up pretty quickly. That tells me our information is getting out there and we may actually be doing some good to the community. So thanks again for watching, and thanks even more for passing along the videos to your friends and posting them up wherever you may hang out online. We can't do this without your views. Our first question this week comes from Slow and Low 364 on YouTube. He says, I have a Remington 700 varmint in Bell & Carlson A2 stock. It's not bedded, and the barrel sits slightly to the right of center looking from behind. I haven't noticed any ill effects, and there's no contact all the way back to the recoil lug. Could this cause a problem when the barrel gets hotter? Awesome videos, by the way. I'm new to the long range and just had my first tactical match last month. Had a blast. Partially thanks to your budget build. Well, Slow and Low, the barrel being off-center in the barrel channel is kind of a common occurrence with H&S Precision stocks. In fact, it's such a common occurrence that Remington addresses it during their Armors course. It has a lot of different things that can cause that. I realize that you said that you're using a Bell & Carlson stock, so some of the things can still be the same. The stock may have a slight warp to it from one side to the other. It happens. We're dealing with composite. We're dealing with several pieces that go together when they lay that chassis in and the mold halves come together. Something may have been slightly misaligned. The second thing that it could be is you could actually have a barrel that's slightly warped. These are production rifles. When the barreled action comes down the line at Remington, there's a guy that actually checks to see how straight the barrel is. If there's a bend in the barrel, they put it in a machine that basically is a great big huge press that bends the barrel straight. There's a guy that's his job is to bend the barrel back to straight. So the barrel could have a slight warp in it. The last thing that it's likely to be is the recoil lug on the receiver might be clocked just slightly one direction or the other. That may be pushing the action to one side or the other when it drops into the recess in the stock. Now all these things sound like they're kind of bad, but the reality is you need to see what your impacts are downrange on the target. Because while the barrel not being straight in the barrel channel may give you a little bit of pause when you look at it, you may start thinking that it's going to shoot off to one side or the other. Really, once you adjust your scope, unless you see that you are starting to have to dial on quite a bit of windage as you go down range on a relatively calm day, I wouldn't worry about it in the slightest. You're really going to want to check your accuracy, and then you're going to want to step out and shoot longer and longer distances and see if you've got any shift to the left or the right. If you don't worry about it. As long as the barrel is free floating, a little bit of gap on one side or the other isn't going to be that big of a deal. Now your question about is it going to cause a problem when the barrel heats up? More than likely not. The Bell & Carlson stocks, when using a standard Remington varmint profile barrel, have plenty of free float in there that you're not going to get enough warp from the heat to cause any kind of problems. If you've got really any question about it, an easy way to check it yourself is burn through 20 rounds really fast and then check the free float. 20 rounds as fast as you can sling them into the chamber and fire them is going to get that barrel about as hot as you're going to get it shooting a precision rifle, and that'll tell you if it's going to warp enough to really worry about it. My bet though is going to be no, that it's not going to be a problem at all. S then GR asks, could you touch on the best lubes such as Frog Lube, Slip 2000 EWL, synthetic motor oil, etc.? Thanks, love your videos. Well, one thing you want to remember is you want to use the proper lube for the environments. We run into lots of issues here lately with somebody saying, well, they're using such and such in Iraq or such and such in Afghanistan, and then trying to use the same thing back in their home environment. So you want to make sure that you're matching what you're using to the environment that you're likely to see. Lubes that are appropriate here in the Ohio River Valley probably aren't going to be exactly what you would want if you're in Alaska or if you're in the Nevada desert. So take that into account when you're looking at them. There are a ton of lubes out there. I really don't have the capacity to be able to go through and test each one. The U.S. government, the Army, has tested quite a few different lubes, and if you do some searching out there, you can locate some of the information that they've gotten through their saltwater spray tests, their cleaning property tests, and all that. One thing you do want to bear in mind, though, is when the military is evaluating a small arms lubricant, they like to go with the cleaning, lubricant, and protectant. They like to try to ball everything up into one product. They want to use one oil that will help you clean the gun so it has solvent properties, one that will lubricate it and allow it to keep operating without metal-to-metal contact, and then one that will also protect it from the environment. So they're expecting one product to do all things. We as civilians, we have the benefit of not having to use one product for everything, so we can use a different product to clean our weapons, and then another product to lubricate them when we shoot them, and then finally another product to protect them if we're going to store them for a long period of time. So don't get hung up on what the military uses. Do your own research as well. What I use is, for a lubricant, I use either CLP or Militech 1. Those have proven worthwhile to me in a wide variety of climates. They may not be the best thing when you get into subarctic environments because it tends to gum up a lot of products. I haven't used Militech 1 in Arctic weather. I have used CLP, and as long as you're not leaving the weapon out to freeze up, it's going to be okay. If you're running it in really, really cold weather, then you want to limit the amount of lube that you're putting on it because it will tend to gum up a little bit. On bolt action rifles, which is probably what a lot of you guys are interested in, I use Militech 1 as my general lubricant on bolt bodies and on the sliding surfaces like the outside of the lugs. Anywhere there's actually load bearing, like on the lug faces or on cocking cam, I'll use TW25B, which is a light grease. It seems to work really well without building up. It will eventually evaporate and dissolve away, so I really haven't had any issues with tons of grease building up like heavier greases tend to do. So it's really a good product, and it wipes away quickly. So you might want to give those a little bit of a try. CLP is still a hangover from my military days. I've still got bottles of it squirreled away around here, and it works okay. It's not exceptional for anything. So if you want one thing to do everything, then CLP, Break Free is the brand. Break Free CLP will work fairly well for a general purpose. The Gupper on YouTube asks, I've been planning on building an AR-15 carbine for closer stuff, but was wondering if there's any feature characteristics, barrel length, contour, twist, etc. that would get me out to 500 or 600 yards with a 5.56 millimeter. I'd like to keep it smaller than a DM, i.e. M16, but I'm not sure that an M4 barrel contour will get me out there. Well, I'm actually in a similar position right now. Our local matches generally only go out to about 500 to 550 yards, which doesn't require the punch that a 308 has, and it really doesn't require the fast flat characteristics that a lot of the 6mm 6.5s have. That combined with the AR-15's accuracy and the speed engaging multiple targets gives it a great benefit for intermediate range matches. What I've been looking at is running a 20-inch or 18-inch with a medium contour. You don't really want to get up into the heavy barrels like they use on service rifles, but the intermediate contours will work fairly well. They're heavier than government profile barrels, so they will be a little bit more rigid, a little bit more consistent, but they won't give you the a weight penalty of an H-bar, which really, when you start shooting offhand and you have to swing the rifle from target to target, that's where that weight really comes in. Even my heavy barrel 20-inch AR is nowhere near as heavy as my AR-10 or my Accuracy International AE Mark II. So even H-bars, you're still going to get a little bit of a benefit of quick shooting and quick handling, but I don't think that really heavy H-bar profile is needed for tactical matches. Now on the twist rate, for what we're doing, you really want to stay with the high ballistic coefficient bullets, the 75 and 77 grain bullets. So I would suggest sticking with a 1 in 8 twist. That's going to give you the widest variety of bullet selection that you can use in that rifle. The difference between an 18 and a 20-inch really isn't that big of a deal. I'm going to go with a 20-inch, I think, just because there's a wide variety of barrels that are out there. So we're going to give it a try and see what we get. I don't think I would go down to 16-inch to shoot a 500-yard match. You can, but I think you're starting to lose a little bit. So I'd stick with the 18 and the 20. You're not really going to be clearing houses with them. Even if you are, you can clear a house pretty effectively with the 20-inch AR-15 if you know what you're doing. Denon Deaden Fuel asks, could you please elaborate on the subject of max effective range of a caliber? Is it true that the max effective range of a cartridge is when the bullet passes from transonic to subsonic? Because of after that we are unable to calculate a drop chart with our ballistic program because of the changing drag and potential stability problem, therefore making it very hard to get a first round hit. Well, if I understand your question correctly, you're asking if the max effective range of a cartridge is limited to where the bullet goes transonic, meaning where the bullet goes from supersonic speed to subsonic speed. The answer to that is no. The max effective is not limited to where the bullet goes transonic. The first thing you got to keep in mind is max effective range is dependent upon what you intend the bullet to do when it gets to the target. If you're hunting, you want the bullet to arrive with enough energy to drop the animal immediately or very close to where it was you shot it. If you're punching paper, all you need the bullet to do is arrive with enough energy to punch a hole in the target. So that will vary greatly depending on what caliber you're shooting and what you intend it to do. Now, the second part of your question was about the ballistic calculator and its ability to calculate where the round's going to impact. Well, the ballistic calculator takes into effect how quickly muzzle velocity is dropping off, and it takes into effect, based on the ballistic coefficient of the bullet, where the bullet will go subsonic. It changes its calculations based on based on the velocity of the bullet at each yard range that you input into the calculator. So it will still calculate with a high degree of probability where that bullet's going to impact even after it's gone transonic. What you end up with, though, is some bullets will go transonic more stable than others. So if you shoot, say, a 20-shot group at 1,000 yards with 175 grain Sierras, and then a 20-shot group at 1,000 yards with 168 grain Sierras, the 168 grains have a notorious reputation for going unstable before 1,000 yards at most environmental conditions. So if you're shooting at sea level in a warm day, that bullet is going to go transonic somewhere between 900 and 1,000 yards. You're going to get a larger cone of accuracy with the 168 than you are with the 175 because the bullets are wobbling a little bit. However, when you find the center of that shot group, it should be right about where the ballistic calculator said it was going to be for both rounds, even though the 175 is more stable than the 168. Now, if you're target shooting, for your maximum accuracy, you want to make sure that that bullet is staying supersonic when it impacts the target. That will keep the bullet the most stable because it is going through some buffeting when it drops back down through the speed of sound. So for target shooting purposes, try to keep them supersonic when they hit the target. For hunting purposes, do what you need to do to keep the energy to bring down the game necessary. SC Long Range asks, have you noticed any point of impact changes when switching from sandbags to a bipod, or from sitting at a bench to shooting prone, etc.? More specifically, have you noticed any predictable trends relating to point of impact change with different shooting positions and rests? Example, concrete barrier, wall standing versus rucksack from the prone position. Well, I really haven't noticed any point of impact changes with any quality rifles that I've shot, no matter what position I'm shooting them in. If you are noticing any point of impact changes with a properly free-floated rifle, then the first thing I would check is to make sure that you're getting consistent cheek weld. The second thing I would check is to make sure you're getting your parallax settings correct. Changing positions will have more of an effect on you, the shooter, than it will on the rifle. Now, shooting off of Barricades, there you run into the principle of hard on soft. What we were always taught is you never want to put a hard object against a hard object when you're shooting off of it. For example, you wouldn't want to lay the fore end of the rifle on a concrete block and fire off of it. Now, I can tell you in my experience, I've never shot for groups with the fore end resting on a hard object. That's something that we're going to have coming up here real soon, because it's a test that I've been meaning to do for a very long time. I can tell you that it has no practical effect on accuracy. When I shoot barricade drills, when I shoot off of strange objects, I'm generally laying the forearm or the folded bipod right on the barricade. I really haven't had any problems whatsoever. When you break it down and you think about it, if you're shooting standing off of a barricade, it's a very unstable position. Even more unstable if the barricade is not hard staked into the ground. If you got a little bit of a wobbly barricade, then you're just a little bit better off than you would be if you were shooting offhand. So there, your ability to hold the rifle in a solid position is going to have a greater effect than the harmonics of the fore end vibrating on the barricade. I have not noticed any difference in the accuracy of a rifle shooting off a rucksack or shooting off a bipod. Now, those of you that haven't yet mastered the bipod and you're getting some hop, or you're getting the bipod torquing from one side to the other, there you may see an accuracy difference if you're shooting off a soft bag or sandbag versus the bipod, because you'll get more consistent results off of a shooting bag or a sandbag than you will if you're not using a bipod properly. The People's Defense asks, is there any way to smooth the action of the Remington 700? I'm not expecting to get it Sako or Tika smooth, but a little smoother would be nice. Well, this is a question that comes up pretty often. When you get a brand new Remington 700, be it an SPS or a SPS Tactical, they tend to be just a little bit gritty when you run the bolt. There's still finish on the bolt that is not as smooth as bare metal. You may have some burrs on the cocking angles, that kind of thing. There are guys that have been really tempted to get in there with lapping compound or stone things or sand things or polish things. My recommendation is don't do it. If you have a problem with a gritty action, the best thing to do is really clean it well, lube it up, and then dry fire. Dry fire, dry fire, and dry fire. All that simply is setting a target up, getting down behind the rifle, pressing the trigger, cycling the action, and repeating over and over and over again. Now, I recommend dry firing versus just sitting in front of the TV and running the bolt, because when you actually dry fire a Remington 700, when you pull the trigger, you're dropping the firing pin assembly. When you lift that bolt handle, the firing pin assembly is working against the cocking cam, and you're actually lifting that firing pin assembly back into place. That's smoothing the inside of the cocking cam. Whereas if you're just running the bolt without pulling the trigger, you're not doing anything to the cocking cam, which is 90% of the force you feel when you lift the bolt. So while just running the bolt back and forth, locking it down and opening it up, will polish the bolt lugs. It won't do anything for the cocking cam. Now as you work through, you'll see some shiny spots develop on the back side of the locking lugs on the bolt, and you'll see some shiny spots develop on the cocking cam. That's where you need to make sure that you're putting that lubricant. As I said earlier in the show, I recommend TW25B as a grease. Drop it on those areas, just a tiny little bit will do you, and keep working that bolt. Slow Wagon asks, I noticed how far back the scope was set in your budget build. Is this your personal preference? I know eye relief is different from scope to scope. Is it better to position yourself further forward or aft on the rifle? Or is it all personal preference? Well, it's not really personal preference because you need to set the rifle up correctly when you first put that scope on. The eye relief of the scope, or how far forward or back it's set in the rings, is going to depend first of all on the specs on the scope, and second of all on the position that you use the rifle in the most. If you shoot offhand the most, then you're going to want to set the rifle up for an offhand position. If you shoot bench rest, then it doesn't make sense to set up the scope for any other position than off the bench. Since I shoot most of my rifles from a variety of positions, then I will set up the scope in the prone position. I like the prone position because that is where it places my face as close to the scope as any other position. There's a second reason for this. When you set up the eye relief on the scope, if it's a variable magnification scope, you set up the eye relief with the scope set on the highest magnification. This is where the eye box is the smallest and the eye relief is the most critical. You have very little room for error when the scope is at its highest magnification. Prone is the most stable position, and that's the position you're most likely to use the highest magnification on the rifle. So it makes sense to set it up highest magnification and prone. That's where you need the best accuracy possible. Now once you've set it up for the highest magnification and prone, when you stand up on your hind legs and you decide to shoot offhand, more than likely you're going to dial the magnification down on the scope because you're going to have a greater room for error when you're slung. That rifle is going to move just a little bit more on the target. Your figure eight, as you cut it, is going to be fairly large, and as you sling up, you're going to want to be able to locate the target quickly when you throw that rifle up to your shoulder. When you throw the rifle up to your shoulder in the offhand position, you're also going to notice your face is a little bit further away from the scope if you're using a relaxed head position. You don't want to have to crane your neck forward to get in the correct position. So since you're using it on lower power, you have a little bit more leeway on the eye relief on the scope, and your head's going to be a little further back. So it just seems to work out well if you set it up highest magnification in the prone, and then from there on out, everything works out. Now on the budget precision build, the scope ended up where it is just because that's how my face and the eye relief for the scope ended up in the prone position. It may end up differently for you. Different people have different length necks. Different people have different body mechanics, so when you get down behind the rifle, your head may be further forward or aft depending on your body makeup. On Facebook, Ryan Inget asks, I'm just starting out with long-range shooting and use a 700 SPS Varmint 243 Win, and the scope is a Millet LRS-1, but it came with very high 35mm rings. The question is, what effect does the scope mounted so far from the bore, 2.5 inches, have on my point of aim? Will it be worth my while to get low rings and get the scope as close to the barrel as possible without touching? Well, Ryan, I know there's a lot of discussion online about how close you can get the rifle scope to the bore of the rifle. A lot of people talk about closer is better, lower is better, etc., etc. What you want to take into consideration is what kind of stock you're using. If you're using a traditional style stock with a non-adjustable comb, then lower really is better. The lower the scope, the more consistent and better cheek weld you're likely to get. When we're working with 44mm, 50mm, 56mm objectives, the large objectives push that eyepiece higher and higher. This in turn requires your cheek to be higher on the comb of the rifle in order to get a proper sight picture through the scope. Well, if you're using a traditional stock that does not have any adjustable comb, now you're left with having to tape something to the stock or using a stock pack or an adjustable cheek piece like a Cartson cheek piece in order to elevate your cheek and get that consistent cheek weld. So in that situation, lower is better. You want to be able to get your cheek really well seated on that stock in the same position time after time. Now if we switch things over and we look at an AR type platform or a chassis system with an adjustable stock on it, now the height over bore is less of an issue. If that scope has to be pretty high in order to clear the barrel, then you can compensate for that by raising the cheek piece on the rifle and still get an extremely consistent, good cheek weld. It's not really a consideration on the ballistic side of things. When you first do your ballistic calculations for that rifle, you input the height over bore just like you would the muzzle velocity or any of the other factors. It's really a constant. When you plug it in, you can now forget about it. It's no big deal. The computer will do the work when it spits it out. It doesn't change depending on what range you're shooting or what temperature it is or any of the other variables. So don't consider the ballistic effects when you're trying to figure out what your scope mounting height is going to be. What you really want to concentrate on is the ergonomics of the system. Are you going to be able to get a proper cheek weld with the height rings that you have? Generally, as a rule of thumb, on a traditional stock, go as low as you possibly can and still clear the barrel and be able to get your scope caps on and all that stuff. On Twitter, Anthony Rossi asked, what brand solvents do you use to clean your rifles? How many shots does it take to realistically affect accuracy? I manually use Hops number 9 as a solvent when I'm cleaning my rifles. I've used it for most of my life and it works well. I haven't really seen much of a reason to change. I do have a bottle of M700 sitting around here somewhere that I'm going to give a try. It's been recommended to me by others that say that it's two-step system. It has one solvent for copper and one solvent for carbon. Supposedly it has the ability to remove the carbon and leave the copper fouling, thus giving you more consistency on a clean bore shot. Haven't got a chance to play around with it, but I hope to here in the future. As far as how many shots it takes to affect accuracy, what I think you're asking is after you're done cleaning, how many shots does it take to get your accuracy back? In my experience, 10 to 20 shots. The smoother the barrel, the less shots it's going to take. So if you've really got that barrel worn in, then it may only take 10 shots for you to return to your peak accuracy. If it is a newer rifle that really hasn't had the barrel worn in, or you've got a particularly rough barrel, it may take up to 20 shots to lay down enough carbon fouling to your copper fouling till you're back exactly where you want to be. That's just going to be experimentation on your part. Different rifles are going to act differently. Now, as far as if you're asking pre-cleaning, I will run rifles up to 500 to 600 rounds on 308s before I clean them. That's generally the point to where I see an unacceptable loss of accuracy. It'll start to degrade just a little bit before then, but I think at 500 rounds you're catching it before it really starts to go downhill. So I'll clean, as a rule, between 500 and 600. On sniper's hide, Sawman556 asks, how about going over how to properly disassemble and reassemble a Remington 700 bolt? Tools required, your thoughts on aftermarket firing pins, and what reducing lock time really achieves. And the pros and cons of using an M16 style and Sako style extractors over a factory extractor. Well, I'll hit your last two questions first. My thoughts on aftermarket firing pins is for what we do, they're really not needed. The Remington 700 has a fairly fast lock time, and lock time is the difference in time from when you press the trigger to when the firing pin strikes the primer. On an AR-15 type system, when you press the trigger, you have to release a hammer. The hammer has mass. The hammer has to start moving, then it has to move through a great big huge arc before it hits the firing pin and then sends the firing pin forward into the primer. On the Remington 700, you don't have any of that. The trigger is actually holding the firing pin assembly back when you release the trigger, it trips the sear, which actually releases the firing pin assembly, flying forward and hitting the primer. That's a very fast action, much faster than an AR-15, much faster than any of the other hammer-fired rifles. So when you start looking at reducing the lock time, it's only a very, very, very tiny difference. I don't know that any of us outside of bench rest shooters really have the ability to note the difference on paper. I'm not bashful in telling you, I know I don't have the ability to notice the difference. What I do notice the difference of is a greatly increased percentage of aftermarket firing pin assemblies failing versus factory firing pin assemblies. The factory firing pin assembly is probably the most reliable one I've seen. So I've never felt the need to swap out firing pin assemblies for any of the aftermarket stuff that is out there right now. Now, one place where you may want to swap firing pin assemblies, though, is if you have one of the older Remingtons that has the J-lock on it. At one point in time, Remington actually put a lock in the firing pin shroud that allowed you to lock the firing pin and prevent tampering of the rifle without a special key. That added some extra parts. It caused some problems that reduced reliability of the system. So if you have a J-lock, and you can tell because there's a little bolt looking thing on the bolt shroud that's got a J-shaped slot in it. If you have a J-lock, get rid of that, put the factory pieces back on it, and you'll be good to go. Don't worry about swapping out for any of the supposed aftermarket upgrades out there. Stick with the factory stuff and you're good. For the question on M16 or Sako style extractors, Remington for a very long time has hung their hat on their 3 rings of steel. If you look at the Remington system, the receiver and the barrel and the bolt face, they make up a layered defense against a ruptured case that's supposed to control the way the gases exit the system, and it's supposed to protect the shooter. When you cut a big chunk out of the side of your bolt and out of the bolt head, in fact a chunk that's large enough to be visible from outside of the rifle system, you now have removed one of the steps of the safety system that's involved. Now, I can't tell you that I've ever heard of anybody that's been injured because they had a Sako or an M16 style extractor installed in the system. I haven't actually heard of it, so safety may be a lower concern there. What I can tell you is I've never really had a problem with the standard extractor system. If you go look at our videos, you can see that I did put up a video with a demonstration of an extractor failure. What it will sometimes do is release the case too early, and the case will flip backwards and land on the follower or land on the next cartridge in the magazine and cause a failure in the system. If this is happening, it's a very quick replacement. You take out the bolt, you pop the extractor out, you pop the new extractor back in, slap the bolt back in, and you're good to go. It's a very cheap part, very fast fix. I can fix one on the line in about 2 minutes. It's not something I really worry about. Anytime I go to an away match with the Remington 700, I carry spare extractors. Quick to replace, quick to get the gun back up. But here's the catch. You rarely ever have to do it. If you treat the extractor the way it's supposed to, which means you never ever remove it for cleaning. The extractors are installed once, they're removed once. If you remove it, you throw it away. If you don't try to get in there and clean behind it, if you don't try to do any of that nonsense, then that extractor will last you for a very, very, very long time. There are extractors in rifles that outlast the owners. They just don't get used as much as you would think they do. Now, in a professional capacity, I rarely ever see the extractors fail. You know, they're mechanical parts, they can fail every now and again, but I rarely do see them fail. That's just not a part that I see a problem with. So really I see it as kind of a wasted expense. I don't have a problem with it. I don't switch out my extractors. I keep the factory extractors in there. If you look at, say, Surgeon rifles, Surgeon 591s, or the old Surgeon RSR, they still use the factory extractor as well. So it's an aftermarket action, aftermarket bolt, but they still use a Remington extractor. So it must not be too bad of a system. So I wouldn't go to swapping it out. I'd go ahead and keep the factory part in there. If you have a gun that for some reason you keep replacing the extractors and you can never get reliable extraction, then it may be a candidate for an upgrade. But then again, there may be something wrong with the actual specs on the bolt face, and I'd measure it and have that checked out. Now, as far as disassembling the bolt to a field strip level on the Remington 700 is extremely easy. I use what's called the bolt lace method, which you can use a string, 550 cord. I use a loop of 550 cord around my bench vise handle, and you hook the end of the firing pin assembly under it. You pull the bolt forward, which then extends the firing pin assembly out until you can see a slot in the side of it. Now, this slot is perfectly sized to drop a penny or a dime into. Just simply stick a penny or a dime into the slot, relieve the tension on it, and that will hold the firing pin back so that you can unscrew the firing pin assembly. Once you've unscrewed the firing pin assembly, that's really as far down as it needs to go for any kind of field cleaning or inspection. You wipe off the spring, wipe off the firing pin assembly, blow out the bolt body, and get that cleaned out, and then relube the spring, screw it back together, make sure you put a dab of grease on the bolt threads, and you're done. If you want to go further than that, Brownells carries a couple of tools that will allow you to screw them onto the end of the firing pin assembly and compress the firing pin spring so you can drive the cross pin out and then further disassemble the bolt. That really isn't something that's necessary at the user end of it. There's nothing you need to get in there and clean on any kind of regular basis. If for some reason the gun was neglected and the firing pin assembly is rusted up badly, then I go ahead and break that down and get in there and clean things out. Make sure you don't have any rust that's going to cause any damage. Otherwise, in your regular day-to-day routine, if you feel the need to totally clean that assembly, get yourself a can of brake cleaner and hose it down with brake cleaner, blow it out with compressed air, and then re-oil it and re-lube the threads, and you'll be good to go. Salt Shaker asks, I would like to see the rebarreling process of the AI AE to 243 Win. I didn't know if you had plans to video that or not. Well, we do have plans to videotape that. I can't tell you exactly when it's going to happen. I've got everything I need to do it here. However, Dennis Adams down in Virginia, we've talked about some different upgrades to the prototype wrench that he sent me. We're probably going to wait until that wrench shows up so you guys can see what that wrench actually looks like and how well it works. It doesn't do a whole lot of good for me to do the rebarrel with the prototype wrench and then tell you all kinds of changes that are going to be made to it. So we'll probably wait for the finished product before we go ahead and knock that out. But we do intend to take care of that for you. On AR15.com, Joe Mama asks, you refer to we in your videos. Is there a mouse in your pocket, or do you have a team at 8541? Well, we refers to a lot of different things. First of all, we refers to me and the voices in my head. There are a lot of us. We carry on conversations from time to time. Sometimes we come up with good ideas. Sometimes they're not so good ideas. But we also refers to my darling wife, Sarah, that helps make some of this stuff possible, and she gives me the time to do this kind of thing. So she supports me in what we do, so we also refers to her. Finally, we refers to anybody that I can recruit to help me out with this kind of stuff. So it just kind of pays respect to the fact this isn't a one-man show. It takes a lot of people's help to get this kind of stuff going. So when you hear me refer to we, I'm not totally insane, just a little crazy. Well, that's it for this week's installment of Mail Call Mondays. Thank you for your questions, and thanks for all the comments on last week's episode. If you've got questions or comments for us, please leave them in the comments section below or send them to us on Facebook or Twitter. We'll sort through the best ones and we'll answer them on next week's episode. Thank you for subscribing. For those of you out there that have clicked that little subscription button above, if you have not subscribed, please click the button. YouTube will let you know when we release new videos. We promise we won't fill up your inbox with spam or send out all kind of junk mail. But it's free, it doesn't cost you anything, and it will help you know what we're doing. You'll notice below there's this little thumbs up button. If you like the video, make sure you click the like button. If you dislike the video, please leave us a comment telling us why you dislike the video. We love constructive criticism. It helps us improve the videos. We are getting this one out in a rush this week. It may not appear first thing Monday morning. We're going to try to get it out as quickly as possible, but maybe a little bit later in the day when it hits the YouTube channel. That's simply because I had an incredibly rough weekend. We were out camping. We were roughing it. So got in a little bit late on Sunday, and we're getting a little bit late start on this. But we're getting it out to you as quickly as possible. Please give us your comments below, and we'll look through them. I do read every comment that you guys leave on every one of the videos. So if you check out our other videos, you like something or you have a question about it, drop a comment and we'll get back to you. Thanks for supporting us, and please keep it up. Till next week, see you. Well, if you're still watching, then by popular request, we'll give you a little extra benefit here at the end. You might be able to read on the edge of the box here. We had this little beauty show up the other day. This is a Mega Arms Ma-10 monolithic receiver set. This will be the basis for an upcoming build series. And let me tell you, this is one beautiful piece of machined aluminum. It is all monolithic. There is no gap between the forend and the upper receiver. It's machined extremely well. A couple of interesting things on this receiver we'll go over real quick here is that it has an ambidextrous bolt release that comes pre-installed. The upper and lower receiver fit is extremely tight. There is no wiggle whatsoever between the upper and lower. When we pop it apart and shotgun it here, you'll notice there's actually a tensioning pin in here that is accessible through the pistol grip area. So if for some reason it's not bank bolt tight when you get it, you can adjust it. If the receiver gets some wear over time on it, you can snug it up through there. Comes with the port door installed, comes with the bolt release installed, and the 2 takedown pins installed. You'll need to provide your own magazine release, trigger group, and your own safety selector, as well as pistol grip. Now, one of the interesting things about the Mega Ma-10 is that it uses a traditional style bolt nut. Barrel nut. It doesn't use any special barrel extensions. You can use either DPMS or Armalite compatible barrels in this system. It gets away with this by using this incredibly huge barrel wrench. What you do is once you have the barrel nut dropped in over the barrel, this barrel wrench fits all the way down through the forend to tighten it in. Kind of an interesting design. In the operator's manual that they sent out with the receiver, it has a list of gas blocks that they recommend that you can use if you're running a mid-length or carbine length system on a rifle length setup, so that you can easily slide it in and get things matched up. Obviously, if you're using a rifle length gas system, it's not a big deal because the block will still be ahead of the end of the forearm. There's no forward assist on this. It does come with the charging handle. The back of the receiver is nicely contoured so it'll flow into a stock or receiver extension that you're using. And it is really an impressive piece. The roll marks on it are accurately cut. They are very nice. The T marks are all present They've got them marked on all the rail sections, and the fore end is really well skeletonized. When I picked it up, it kind of amazed me that it was as light as it was for its appearance. One added benefit you have is you've got flush cups machined at 4 points on the receiver, so you've got quite a variety of options there. Really looking forward to getting this together. I think what we're going to do on this is going to be a police sniper rifle build. We're going to put a 16-inch barrel on it, and we're going to set it up so that it would be optimally used for a SWAT team member in a designated marksman or sniper role. And we'll show you guys why we do some of the things we do on it. That we have coming up. We don't have an estimated completion date on it. We're still sourcing all the rest of the parts, but Mega was kind enough to get this out to us fairly quickly. So my initial impressions on it are it's a great setup. I really like some of the designs on it. Somebody commented on the SHOT Show video that there really wasn't anything groundbreaking about it. While you may not think that an Ambidextrous bolt release or the monolithic upper is groundbreaking, you really don't have to have anything groundbreaking to have a very solid, accurate, and reliable weapon system. In fact, sometimes quite the opposite is true. Sometimes you don't want to go with groundbreaking, incredibly unique things because they leave a room for error in the system. This, I think, is a solid start to a precision rifle build. We'll be really interested to see how things work out when we get it done. Again, thank you for watching the video to the end. Now, you can go check out some of our other videos. Thanks for watching.